Hi, this is Alex from Anthelion Helicopters and welcome to another video. This time it's about flight instruction and all the different licenses that we offer for an aspiring pilot. I know you guys usually have a lot of questions for what licenses mean, what they are, how do I get them, what order do they go in, what can I use them for, what can't I use them for. So in this video we aim to break that down a little bit for you and talk you through all those different ones. So, the first thing to note about our licenses is the great thing is you don't need to know if you want to be a pilot for fun or a pilot for a career. It all starts at the same place, which is the private pilot's license. Think of it as the first building block of your license, and it teaches you the fundamentals of what you know to become a pilot and to fly on your own. Now, bear in mind, this is the first level. Never regard a private license as the be-all and end-all of your flying career, even if you're not going to do it as a career. Always think of the private license as an opportunity to learn further after it. But according to the FAA and the regulations, it is the most basic level of license that you need, and everything starts from there. Usually, it is around about, a minimum is about 40 hours of flight time for it, unless you're what's called a Part 141 school, which we are, which I'll touch upon later. Typically though, bear in mind that's a minimum standard, it's not a maximum standard, and the national average actually for a private license is somewhere in the region of 70 to 80 hours. We see our students who are reasonably full-time go through in around about 45 to 50 hours as an average, some as low, some really close to the 40 mark, some a bit later. Now, a lot of those hour numbers are dependent on a lot of factors. It's not just how good you are. It's usually to do with how often you can come in and train. Helicopter flying, as you'll find out once you do it, is a lot of muscle memory, and the more you immerse yourself in it, the faster you will learn. If you're flying 2 or 3 times a week, you'll pick it up a lot faster than if you're flying once a month. But always, people will have constraints, whether it be time or financial or personal. So I'm just trying to give you a rough guide as to where it sits. So, you usually budget around about 45 to 55 hours. It is pretty typically what we see. Now that's 40 to 55 hours in an aircraft. You'll probably do the equivalent on the ground as well in the classroom. I know it's not the most fun bit, and people love flying more than they like doing classrooms, but it is very, very necessary. Where you'll learn everything from aircraft systems through to weather, through to flight navigation, through to aerodynamics, and everything in between. It provides the framework that you'll need to apply all of what you know in the air. Throughout your license as the private license, there'll be a number of tests before you actually take your license. I call them gates, or we like to call them gates. And the biggest one by far is what's called your pre-solo test. So as part of your license, you have to fly on your own. Obviously, this is the first time when you've not had an instructor on board, and it's a pretty nerve-wracking experience. You've been flying around with that safety net for about 20 hours, and suddenly you are all on your own. Now, as nerve-wracking as that sounds to people who haven't done it before, I can guarantee that by the time that you do it, you'll be so immersed in the training, it will just seem like a natural progression. You'll just do things by the numbers because you've been taught to do that. But prior to that, you'll have a big test with us internally where we'll check both your ground portion, that your level of knowledge is where it needs to be, and also you'll have a check out with the chief pilot as well to make sure that your flying is where it needs to be. Always remember that safety is number one priority. We'll never let you do something before you're capable and safe of doing it. So that's a major portion of your private license in that 40 to 50 hours. You will have other parts as well, such as night flying, cross-country flying, and other things like that. But the solo is the big one, and that's usually quite close towards the end of the license before you take your test. Speaking of the test, all the tests follow, no matter what licenses we're talking about, they all tend to follow the same format. You'll do what's called a written exam, which is an FAA multiple choice exam, which has been around for years in various iterations. There's various software out there that you can use to help you with it, whether it's something called Shepherd Air, which I used. There are a number of them, or Dauntless Aviation, but they all prepare you to take a multiple question test. They usually last about 2 to 3 hours. And you've just got to get a 70% pass rate in them to pass. Of course, we'd like you to get them much higher. It'll make the next stage, which I'm about to talk about, a bit easier. So the final part of your private license, and indeed every single license you do, will be a formal examination by an FAA designated examiner known as a DPE. Obviously, it's a very nerve-wracking experience, but I can assure you that these guys are very, very good and fair at what they do, and it's their job to issue the license and then just checking that you are going to be a safe pilot. And they examine you to a certain set of standards, which are prerequisites, which are all very, very fair, and they are the standards that you will need to pass. We always, I should note at this stage, we always train in excess of these standards. We always train you to exceed the standards because they are minimum standards. And at the end of the day, it's not like pulling over a car on the side of the 405 in a helicopter. You need to be able to effectively pilot that aircraft to the ground. And we take that very, very seriously. So you'll always get trained to exceed the standards laid down by the FAA as minimums. So your private license really is the first building block, and it really just enables you to fly for fun. You can't fly for what we call compensation or hire. You can't get paid to fly. It's literally recreational. You can take people with you, and you can charge them for what we call a pro rata share. But the important thing to note is it's not a license to fly to earn money. For that, you need to move through the program and go further. The next license that you'll get after your private, which builds on the things that you've learned, is called a commercial license. It is an extension of the private license, I would say, an evolution, where a lot of the things will be the same, they'll just be to higher standards. So the envelope you have to pass at the end of your commercial license in the test, the standards will be a lot stricter. There are longer cross countries and things like that, and there are more night requirements and something called instrument requirements as well, which I'll talk about in a second. And typically the minimum standard for that is 150 hours of flight time, 150. So theoretically 3 times the amount of a private license. Now the commercial license, theoretically once you've got that, you could say, I can go and get a job and fly commercially. Well, unfortunately, that is not really the way things work in the real world, because the real world in aviation is arguably governed by the insurance companies, who want to see a lot more hours before you can go and fly really big helicopters and fly on the ORIGs and things like that. So the natural progression after getting a commercial license is to become an instructor. But briefly, before I touch on instructor, let's backpedal a little bit just to talk about what's called an instrument rating. Now, it's important to note that the instrument rating is what's called a rating. It's not a license. So it adds on to an existing license, and the minimum you need in order to go for an instrument rating is a private license. So actually most people do it as part of their commercial training, and indeed we do, because that saves time and money for the student when we incorporate it into the commercial license. Now, what I mean by an instrument rating is kind of what you would imagine it to be. It means that you're flying solely with reference to the instruments. So in layman's terms, if you fly into a cloud, you can still effectively pilot the aircraft when you can't actually see where you're going, as you would in normal circumstances, and get safely to the ground. In practical terms, we call it IMC, or Instrument Meteorological Conditions. When you're doing a private license, you do it what's called in VMC, Visual Meteorological Conditions, or VFR, Visual Flight Rules. So, in which case, in layman's terms of that, is you can see where you're going, and you can see the ground, and you have minimum horizontal and vertical distances that you can see, and both to the clouds as well, separation from the clouds. I won't get any more into that right now, but the fundamental difference is that an instrument rating is teaching you to fly purely by looking at the instruments. So it's a completely different type of flying, and some people love it and some people hate it. I loved it. It's more like a computer game to me, and I think that's the best way you can analogize it, is to think of it as a computer game. It's all about referencing all the different instruments and information that you've got, and making the appropriate actions with the flight controls and on the radios as well, because there's a lot on the radio work. But essentially that will add on a rating, an instrument rating, to your private license and go along with your commercial. And I should really let you guys know that obviously in the current job market, an instrument rating is either completely required for some types of career, or it's just a general must. Most employers will want you to have an instrument rating, not because you're necessarily going to fly in the clouds, but it just shows an extra level of proficiency that is very, very desirable, and also it shows the employer that you know more than a regular pilot. You've taken that step of getting further education there, and that if any situation exists when you have the deterioration in the weather conditions or visibility, that you can get yourself out of it, and you have those tools to get yourself out of it. Think of it like a tool bag, as it were. It's another really important tool in your tool bag. So the instrument rating, big difference to regular flying. It's the one where you're not looking out the cockpit, you're looking inside the cockpit, and your private and commercial is predominantly looking outside the cockpit in visual flight rules, VFR flying. So once you've done all those, you'll be around about 150 hours, give or take, with your licenses, and you'll have done your instrument rating as part of your commercial, so it won't add on to the top of it in terms of hours and cost. You will then take the final stage before becoming an instructor, which is where most people end up in our program when they're going professionally, and becoming a certified flight instructor, or CFI. And the add-on to that is an instrument instructor, a CFII, a certified flight instructor instrument. So becoming an instructor is probably the hardest part of your training after the initial 20 hours before you solo, because not only now do you have to fly the aircraft, you also have to teach. And teaching is, as many people know, an incredibly difficult thing to do effectively. It's a lot easier to do something yourself than it is to actually communicate that to other people. It's a real skill, and in a lot of ways, flight instructors are the unsung heroes of the flight industry, because everything starts with them, and everything will start with you once you become it. Depending on how you teach and how effective you are, that really lays the building blocks for the types of pilots that you're creating, and that will go ahead into the future, into the further industry. And you'll see that as when you're coming through as well. You'll probably work with different instructors, and everyone has different techniques. It is something that we pride ourselves in here at Anthelion. We take this incredibly seriously, and the caliber of instructors that we get through our program is far and away exceeds the industry standard, and we're very, very proud of that, and we maintain those standards extremely high for very good reason. Number one, safety is a priority, and we've got 100% accident incident free record in our school ever since we've started. We really practice what we preach with that, because fundamentally that's the most important part of becoming a pilot. We all want to come home, and we want to come home safely. So the CFI program is pretty intense. Again, there's a lot of classroom work, but this time you're the teacher. You are teaching our instructors how you would teach them if they were a new pilot. So it can be quite intimidating to start with, when you've got to do lesson plans and you've got to figure out, okay, how do people learn, and look at the psychology behind learning to see how can I communicate it. What we do find is, just because you understand it yourself doesn't mean that you can effectively communicate it to other people, and it's worth acknowledging that everyone learns in different ways, and that's part of the challenge as an instructor when you're going through that license, is to think, how can I communicate to all these different types of people? How do I say something effectively to two people who learn completely differently? And that's part of the skill. You have to be very sort of fluid and adaptable in how you do it. Now, typically we see around about 20 hours, 20 to 30 hours of ground instruction for your CFI. You'll produce your own folder and lesson plans, and how you're going to teach with all the material that you need in there. And then we'll see somewhere between 10 and 20 hours in the aircraft. Again, it all depends on your proficiency and how prepared you usually are for it. And then you'll have a check ride for your CFI, which is usually the longest of all of your check rides. It can be nearly a day sometimes. It was for me when I did mine, 12 years ago now. An entire day where you're teaching and instructing, and that really goes to show just how important it is to the examiners and to the industry as a whole. It is taken very, very seriously when you're doing a whole sort of day's worth of exams. Following on straight on from that, what you'll tend to do is your instrument instructor, where you'll take those building blocks that you've applied and learned from your CFI and apply it in an instrument context to become an instrument instructor. Much, much shorter usually, because obviously you've done all the groundwork for becoming a teacher, both in terms of how to teach it in the air and on the ground. So we typically see a much shorter time scale for that, around about 5 hours of flying and 5 to 10 hours of ground instruction as well. Now, at this juncture, I should let you know that what I've been talking about in general terms is about what we call a Part 61 flight school, which is, there's two types of flight school, basically. There's a Part 141 and a Part 61. A Part 61 is not as heavily regulated by the FAA as Part 141. Indeed, a Part 141 is a certification and an approval by the Federal Aviation Authority, which you get tested on throughout an extensive period to be able to achieve. They will inspect your syllabuses, how you teach, so it's all written down, your lesson plans, your aircraft, your instructors, your facility, everything. It's an absolutely extensive and exhaustive process for the schools. And always bear that in mind when you're looking at schools, that a 141 school will tend to be have a lot better school than, better is very subjective, I should say, more experienced school than a 61 school. Because of the rigors of going through the process to become FAA certified. We are a 141 school. We've been through the process. We pride ourselves in it, and it is a long road to get it. And we're very proud that we have, and all our instructors get checked out by the FAA to be 141 instructors at the same time. So once you've done your instructor licenses, you'll typically be around anywhere from about 180 to 200 hours, and you need 200 hours to teach in helicopters. And once you've done your instructor license and you've got your 200 hours, then hopefully you get a job with us, and you will then practice what you've preached for the last 200 hours and get to put it in practice and earn some money. And when you're working for us, you're not only an instructor, you'll become a tour pilot and a photography pilot, and maybe even shoot some movie stuff, and maybe even do some charter work as well. So in summary, from zero to hero, as it were, you start with your private license. Now, after you've done your private license, you can just stop. If you're just doing it recreationally, you can just do it for fun and stop there. However, we always recommend, even if you're going to stop and not actually do it as a career, always think about continuous education and continual education. Always think about flying as you can never be the best. You can always just get better. The worst thing that a pilot can be is complacent. So if you have the attitude as I always want to learn, even if I'm not going to fly commercially, getting a commercial license or instrument rating is just holding you to a higher standard. It's just giving you more tools in your bag and your tool sets to be able to fly with, because believe me, after 20 years of experience doing this, when you're up in the air, you want as many tools as you possibly can do. Like I said, safety has to be the be-all and end-all of what we do, and the more you can learn, the better you can be, which at the end of the day, this has to be the only real priority. You just want to be the safest and the best pilot you can be. So once you've done your private, you can decide, and many people do. There's some people don't know what they want to do right at the beginning and just say, well, go and do your private license and then decide. You don't have to decide from day one. You just enroll either a Part 141, which we tend to do for most of our students, but that's a whole other conversation, of course, when we get into that. And then go through it. Just go through it. Go through the experience. Go through the journey. And then once you've got your private license, you might decide, hey, this is the best thing since sliced bread. This is all I want to do and all I ever want to do. I want to now, ditch my other job and become a helicopter pilot as a career. And you can do that. Or conversely, you cannot. You can say, I love it, but I just want to fly for fun. And you can just fly for fun after that. And we have certain standards that we need for renting aircraft, obviously, because if you want to fly on your own afterwards, you'll have to rent. And we have certain checks and standards for that. But the journey is up to you, really, at the end of the day. There's no prerequisites for saying you must do this, you must do that. It's your journey. We will encourage you and tutor you on the way, all the way through, and think of it just as an experience. Life is about experiences, and quite honestly, this is one of the best out there. And I'm sure you'll all have a tremendous journey, and you'll learn more about yourself than you ever have done before throughout the training process. So if you've got any questions or comments, or you'd like some more information, please just leave it in the comment section below. We look forward to hearing from you more, and please shoot us an email if you need to, or come in and visit and talk more about what it is to become a pilot. Please subscribe to the channel, and watch out for my notifications. Please turn your notifications on so that we can update you with any more uploads of future videos and any follow-ups to this one, should there be a demand for some more questions out there. Again, thanks for watching. This is Alex again with Anthelion Helicopters, and I hope you enjoyed the show.